So this is a chance really to take stock of where we're at and of where we've come from this morning. Before we do that, I'd just like to say that Susan Holland joined us just a few weeks ago, and the first job she got was organising a seminar talking about trial by fire, but she's done a great job. Well done, Susan. That was very important. Thank you to all of the speakers. I've really enjoyed hearing the presentations today. We've had a whistle-stop tour of the relationship between craft and technologies of production from medieval times up to what's current and coming. And we've had such a wide span of practice as well, as each maker has articulated their own response, I guess, to technologies of production. The day's been structured very specifically so that the morning session looked at makers who are responding to industry, to what we might call history, and the afternoon section was makers who were responding to digital technologies. And in a way, as thinkers and as makers, that's where we all are. We're all poised between history, and actually it's novel to our age that we have an awareness and an understanding of history that's unprecedented historically, so that we can actually see the consequences of decisions very quickly, and we can also see the rise and fall or the ebb and flow of things like methods of production, globalization, etc. And we also have instant access and instant knowledge to innovation, to technology, to new occurrences all of the time. So the question that I'm putting forward as a framework right now is, how does craft evolve within that space between history and future? How does it retain what gives it its integrity, the integrity of the handmade, yet also remain current and relevant to a very changing world? And within that is a kind of a broad question that we can look at or not look at. I'd like to ask you now, as practitioners, as thinkers, as makers, to maybe share your own observations, ideas, thoughts, and most importantly questions, because you've got all of these people in one place, so it's an opportunity to ask those things that have been occurring to you as the day's gone on. So I'll open the floor. Yes?
I'm not sure who brought provenance, place and personal history. Thanks. Provenance, place and personal history written down here in the few notes I took. And I think they're really, really important. And I heard the voice of Johnny Gold this morning talk about provenance, place and history. But I also have to say that I don't think anyone would touch their designs if they weren't fabulous designs. Not only did those guys have a story, but they also had a really, really beautiful product. And you can have a great story if you haven't got a beautiful product. I don't think anyone's going to buy it. So I think that's really important. I think design is really, really important and very, very high up in that thing. And then in the afternoon, we heard Teresa talk about her jewellery and talk about the technology that she used. But really, you could see from the work and the way she worked that really, if she was abandoned on a desert island with a tube of glue, she'd probably produce very, very beautiful designs as well. So I think actually an awful lot of it is about design, and it's about people's creativity, and of course using their provenance, place and present history. But I think design is paramount and vitally important, and it has to be there for the actual production of fantastic stuff. You know. I think we can all learn technology, we can all learn process, we can all learn all those things. So I think you need design, good design. It's really right.
I think you've pinpointed something that ran through everybody's presentations in one way or another today. But I'm just wondering, Sean and Kieran, have you perhaps made decisions in terms of the technology that you use? You were saying that at one point you were updating the machinery because it allowed for greater output. In the new business, has that changed? Has that
like the looms that we're still using and we intend to use for quite some time are from the 70s. Like, they're not hand looms, they're much further advanced than that, I guess. But we're not, like, well, for one, we can't afford to buy new looms because you're talking like maybe 70, 80, 90 grand a pop. But they would be able to go maybe 4 times as fast, which would turn into more money, I guess, but it's much less of a craft. They would be completely computerized and there's much less looking after and making sure it's not making any faults and stuff like that. But at the moment we aren't intending moving on to something more advanced anyway. Like, they can make quite a bit of cloth, and when you move on to the newest technology for weaving now, it's not like you could look after maybe 8 or 10 looms, and they would each go like 4 times as fast as ours. So you could really, one person could make about 40 times as much in a day as we could.
Would that change the nature of the cloth?
Very little. Like, in honesty, it wouldn't necessarily change it so much, but it will be much more of a commodity then. It's not like, it would turn into a commodity product as opposed to something that there's more of us put into, I guess.
And what do you think, Teresa? Do you think a tub of glue and some wood and you'd be...
Yeah, bring it on. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, essentially, with my background, I mean, I'm still pretty young, but with my background, I spent 5 years at the bench making jewelry. So I know you did ask me if I see myself as a maker or a designer during my external, and I have become a bit more of a designer, and I think I've started to think more with a design mind when faced with using that technology. I think it's an adjustment that you have to make. But yeah, drawing is also still making. It's still, the whole process for me it's a making process. Yeah.
Could I respond to that? In large industrial terms, I think your point is absolutely key to the future of what's going to happen, particularly with the glass industry. And innovation is one of the most important things in a worldwide situation with glass, but also in the Irish story of where the durability of this craft is going to go, and how working with an extremely expensive material like glass, with the translation of that tacit knowledge, is key to where it's going to go into the future. The men who have the skill in the country right now don't have the design skill because they haven't been trained in that, but they have the actual tacit skill. So it's a combination of looking where we can actually make those bridges work, and also looking at innovation in a pure sense of innovation of uses of glass for prestige or for functionality, so that it really does have a durable future and not a situation of tokenism or trophyism, which is what it exists in at the moment.
Just if I may ask one question, do you think, and Neil as well, do you think that, do you think both the glass industry in Ireland and maybe the ceramic industry in England, was it an issue with design? Was that partly part of the issue?
Certainly in the Irish story it is.
Yeah, I know that was, yeah.
Yeah.
Was it the same?
Yeah, very much. I think it was a fear of embracing anything new and trying to hang on to the past as a tool for the American and Japanese market, really, which did work to a certain degree, but then there was no scope for, embracing any new designs. And I think the ceramics industry really relied on ceramic designers, and they've got a great sense of that history, but then I think, they would never embrace any kind of designers or artists from another area, not in the kind of... Wedgwood did have a whole history in the 18th century of getting new artists in, people like John Flaxman to Eduardo Palazzi, so you'd get this kind of whole range, but it suddenly stopped about the kind of mid-80s, so you had this kind of...
When the Germans started doing it? When German industry started doing this kind
of... well, the thing was, Wedgwood did own Rosenthal as well later. And that was maybe, I don't know, the kiss of death for them as well.
Maybe.
I wondered that actually, just the commonality between the Waterford crystal and Wedgwood, that they both became commodities in themselves, not just the product they made, but them as entities, as brands, as factories, were commodities that could be traded. And a lot of the woes that befell them were actually to do with trading on that level rather than on the ground.
Yeah, I think that's very much what happened. It became something of a tag, didn't it, Wedgwood? And I think they exist very much as a tag now, you know. The meaning of that history of kind of making within them seems to be kind of less important
than the brand.
Yeah, the whole idea that this product was made from generations of skill passed down, you know, it's become kind of a myth in a way, and the reality is very different. It's what they want you to believe, but don't believe them.
I think it brings up another issue with the whole idea of globalization and accessibility to design, in the fact that regionality will start to become, it comes back to the sense of place, regionality will become an issue within the globalization of accessibility to design. And so where in Ireland is that? Where are we going to find that? And how does that exist? In the Scandinavian model, it's very evident. In the German model, it's very evident also. You know, so where are we standing with that, and how can we influence that, or nurture it, or look into it from the point of innovation? And that is something that I think we should be having a conversation about in a much wider way, incorporating, you know, many of the craft practices that we're talking about. You talked about materials, vernacular materials or accessible local materials, which feeds into a global thought process. With glass, you know, it is a product that is not indigenous to here, but it is an iconic material that is associated with Ireland in a much larger sense, from the point of view of, you know, if you think about things that belong to Ireland, you know, it's Guinness, it's Waterford Crystal, it's tweed, it's Ireland knitting, you know. So where do we fit into the bigger picture from the point of innovation, using those kind of indigenous sort of key points, I suppose, and how do we bring that about?
Because that's something there's definitely a huge market for, not just in Ireland but outside of Ireland as well, about that kind of that specificity of something that's from a particular country and has that level of tradition and the level of background and skill. You know, if you're talking about generations worth of ideas and generations worth of skill being built on, that there's something quite attractive. It might not be your own background or culture, but other people from other backgrounds and cultures to appreciate it.
So you also talked about the Kilkenny Design Workshops, and you spoke in your talk about how the challenge maybe was to find something that's intrinsically Irish but not twee, and that really is the project the Kilkenny Design Workshops had as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Have you any revelations to share with us, perhaps based on the practitioners talking today? No pressure.
I mean, one of the things about it is that I realised from doing this talk and listening to people today, a lot of it is about coming down to looking at the materials in a lot of ways, using the skills and how things are being manipulated and used, but about the use of material and how that's used to reflect a particular place. I don't know if, and it's something that you see, I mean, looking back kind of the arts and crafts movement, where it's the very obvious approach of, okay, let's put some Celtic interlace on everything and, you know, get designs from the Book of Kells and work away with that. Whereas that's probably a bit more of an obvious approach. Whereas I think what people are doing today is something that's probably not as immediately obvious, but it's probably got more depth to it rather than anything else. And it's got more resonance at a level that's not such a superficial level. I don't know whether everyone agrees with me or not, but it's...
Yeah, I suppose I would agree with what Roisin was saying, and I think that you know, historically we haven't, since Kilkenny Design Workshops, really invested in that concept of design and in that concept of driving, you know, forward in a collective way with an Irish identity in relation to design and in relation to what we, you know, what is indigenous to us, what identifies as what's quite distinctive about us. And I read in your piece about the geographic indicators, you know, and that we need to be shouting as loud as France does about the Champagne region to get that kind of recognition for what is indigenous to here, but to the country. But we also need to claim our design aesthetic and our design identity, and we need to brand it. And we need to brand it through all of the other really strong positives that we have, because we're seen globally as this incredibly cultural society and cultural people, and for us it should be a relatively small step to be able to claim that in terms of craft and in terms of material and in terms of design. And I think, you know, now is the time for us to do that, and I think we, you know, need to work hard at bringing those skills to the fore, and also providing those facilities and access to those facilities so that we can do that. But I also do think that the international perspective is really, really critical and very important. And the fact that we're an island, sometimes it makes it even more relevant. You know, when you look at the impact that the Scandinavian report had back then, and the legacy that it led to, you know, I think we need to be open to bringing international people into Ireland, to getting them to look at us critically, and, you know, to working together again to seeing a way forward.
But that's something particularly with the Kilkenny design workshops for the 60s and 70s. It was actually quite successful at providing some sort of a negotiation between those two influences about being local and regional, but bringing in ideas from outside. But the trick is to try and renegotiate that for today, because now you're looking at issues to do with, you know, using open source software, or you're looking at ideas about using the internet as a business tool. You're looking at ideas about 3D printing. It's a completely different set. It's a different context, a different set of issues and different set of backgrounds. But you're talking about things like you're going to have to remind me the name again of the Maker Lab? The Maker Lab that you were talking about again. That's an idea that's working in, it was in Switzerland.
Berlin and Milan.
Yeah. That it's working in one particular place, but there's no reason why you can't take something like that and start to look at how would that work in another context with another set of sort of specific tools and people and technology and all the rest of it.
Well, I think we actually really have our own model here of that, but in a different forum. If you look at what's happened in traditional music in the last 30 years, you know, 30 years ago, nobody would be walking around openly with their instrument, you know, as a flag of them actually playing traditional music in a public place. It was something that was frowned on and looked at as some kind of cronyism. And in the last 30 years, it has exploded into one of the biggest marketing success stories, which has happened from the ground root level. And when you look at the amount of interaction and cross-fertilization that has happened through the language of music amongst, you know, really grassroots sort of people who really play, and, you know, their life is about playing music, and how that has actually filtered right the way through up until, you know, the shop in Tokyo playing traditional music, and everybody wants a little bit of it. And, you know, you can learn on the internet any tune that you want, or if you can, you know, you have your app to recognise whatever tune Martin Hamish is playing. You know, it's quite extraordinary how that has also adapted technology in a different way, but is very much a living tradition, but has reinvented itself and exploded into, you know, a completely new language in a way, or an extension of that language. And I think we can look at the models that we have, which are particularly Irish, which, you know, you can't find easily or teach easily, but are part of the innate makeup of an Irish person, in that willingness to share and communicate on a different sort of level, on a spiritual level, on a very deeply rooted cultural level. I think that is something that we can really start to work with from the point of view of trying to find out who we are and where we're going, from the point of view of you know, the indigenous nature of what we do.
What scares me a little about that, though, is that perhaps as a product of the nationalist project, there is a conception of Irishness that's, you know, quite twee and very unreal, that's used frequently as a marketing tool. And I'm thinking actually, Shay, of having to operate as a jeweller, you know, against all of those people out there making their cladders, etc., that it must be very frustrating to be a contemporary jewellery designer having to kind of battle through that level of kitsch, basically, which is what it is. And I worry about our understanding of Irishness, if it's sophisticated enough yet to be able to produce things. Andrew, do you have?
No pressure, Shane.
I don't worry about it at all. The more kitsch there is and the more kind of preconception there is, the better an opportunity you have to slice through it with a clear voice. So if everybody's doing a hackneyed anachronism and you can do it with a little bit of clarity or simple thought, you can use it to your advantage, I think. So the more preconception there is, the better for me if I'm trying to do something different. I don't worry too much about being Irish, and I think that looks after itself. A lot of our work probably, I hope, can stand against any work anywhere from anywhere in the world. And I think the kind of idea of international influence isn't so much a kind of programmable need anymore where you need to get people from Scandinavia to come here and give us their opinion. I think that happens every morning when people turn on their computer and have a look online before they get their coffee. It happens a lot quicker, and you don't know necessarily where the influences are coming from. That you're looking at an object and it's going to be a little bit after you react to it that you discover was it made in South Africa or Australia or Berlin. And a lot of people's work and its quality can stand that comparison, I think.
So you don't think there's an intrinsic Irishness? You think it's a global?
There is, but it's going to be more easily identifiable maybe in retrospect, as it's happening. I think people respond more to their work, and I don't know. It's not a case of having a theory that you're Irish and that then becomes the preeminent thing influencing your work. It's going to happen anyway. All of what goes into you goes into your work. And it's afterwards, in retrospect, people may be able to say, well, this clearly was Irish work from 2010 or 2020. It's not something that people set out to do. And you can't deny its influence, but I wouldn't worry about it having to have that look or what made it look Irish. I think that may be a skewing perspective if you started with that as your main influence thing.
Good. And I'm just wondering, actually, Sasha, you were talking about working in New York and London, and also exhibiting annually in London and here. And do you notice, from that perspective, do you notice something that you think is a particular aesthetic or USP of Irish work?
Well, the quality is really, really high. That's one thing that I really noticed when I came back from New York and I looked around and I was like, my God, there's so much amazing work going on here. And it's, you know, we're a small country, and the amount of really quality work is just outstanding, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it does get pigeonholed into what's, you know, perceived as Irish. I suppose I do a lot of work with the furniture crowd, and there's a few people trying to break the mold there, but there's a lot of quite, you know, typical work going on, which that's, you know, that's fair enough. It's you know, bread and butter, but yeah, I think yeah, it's I don't know what you can call. I mean, I think it's really interesting what Roisin's saying there about, you know, it being maybe one level down, that everyone needs to kind of just stand back a bit and have a look at what you think is really Irish. I mean, my stuff's quite obvious, and a lot of the materials I work with are very Irish, and it's kind of looks Irish, but I don't know if it's, you know, does it look Irish in the traditional sense? I don't know.
I don't actually mean it in a visual sense.
No,
I mean it in a much more fundamental sense. And I think that the Malloys have really actually verbalized what that difference is. You know, of course you can maximize your production and you can make, you know, what you're doing with very little difference, but it isn't about that for you. It is about the actual process of making and that continuance of what you are doing for the reason that you're doing it for, and that works for you and it may not work for the next person, but there is a conversation there that needs to be, you know, entered into from the point of view of where we're coming from and where we're going into the future.
They're more ineffable, those areas, definitely, but I think actually Kieran's words were along the lines of there's more of us in it, and it becomes very difficult to think about how you can quantify what that more is and how you could put more of that in the first place. It is, as you're talking about, it's a deeper relationship, but obviously on some level that's a relationship that can be discerned or felt within objects by a viewer.
I think you can also look at that from what happened with the soccer thing, you know, of this incredible movement of people getting incredibly wanting to be a part of that, even if they're not soccer fans. They just want to be there, and it's not to do with the drinking and the party, but it's just the actual experiential, you know, being able to say, I was there, I was in it, I am it. You know, those 4 minutes that they sang the Fields of Athenry, you know, can we hear it again? But you know, that was the moment. So how can that be translated, you know, to drive something forward that is actually belongs to us, you know, because that does belong to us. That experience has not been, you know, relived by anybody else at the Euros. It is something to do with the people of Ireland.
I heard the Polish sang well too.
They did, but they didn't sing for 4 minutes when they lost miserably. That's the point.
We're really good at losing gracefully.
So, you know, I think there is a spirit within this country that, you know, can somehow be harnessed to pull us in different directions if we can find a way.
If I can add to that now, obviously I missed, I only was here for the first half hour, so I've missed a lot of the conversation that's gone on. I think the point you're making is very valid, but it's not for us to go and try and maximise it in kind of a marketing way. It's to develop it, which is the point you're making, is to make it be, and I think there's so much creativity and talent throughout the country, it's there. But it's how are we going to communicate that message in a very meaningful way. And I've been looking just over the last while, like the craft sector and the craft and design sector is so important to Ireland, but it's not always easy to translate that. At the moment, you have a lot of people and they're looking at, we're all saying that it's really important that we have our own Indigenous industry. However, we've got to narrow that down. We can't, as a country, be good at everything. And at the moment, there's about, if you look at the government's job plan, there's about 10 or 12 different sectors that we want to be all good at. We've got to go after a number of, one or two things and get really good at that. And I think creativity and culture and what we're doing here is one of the areas that we need. We're inherently good at it. We've been good at it from down through the ages. So it's developing that. But then kind of to add to the design piece, we have to have our quality and our standards and our incredibly good design to really make it and to make a mark internationally. And we're doing that. I've just been looking at different countries and countries' competitiveness, global competitiveness, so closely linked to its design ability. And if you look at, and I see Louisa smiling because she's heard me say this many times, that countries that are at the fore in terms of design and innovation and in terms of craft are very high up in terms of competitiveness. And you look at countries who've gone after that and have put resources behind it, and they've shot up. And as a country, that's what we've got, something that's naturally inherent in a lot of people across the country, and we've got to develop that, and we've got to invest in it. But I suppose I'm talking to the converted here, but I'm sure there's not anyone that disagrees with that. I think the Irish is something that's there, and we develop it. We don't want to over-market it. we want, because, but it
It's
comes
already
out
been
through
done.
standards and through quality, and it's, and just one of the, what reminds me of is the 21st Century Icons as an exhibition. That was something that was very much, and I know a number of, well, Roisin and Sasha, you were both part of that.
Not Sasha.
No, that's not it. But that was very much taking like our traditional heritage and putting a contemporary feel on it and seeing what came out of that. And I thought what came out of that was something that was very special and very remarkable. I know it was probably done over a short period of time, if I recall, but that shows our tradition and where we've come from is very much where we're going to go to over the next, you don't have to differentiate or you don't have to separate it. So I'll hand back.
Are there any more questions from the floor? Is there anybody with a burning need to say the thing that they've been thinking about all day?
Strength in numbers.
Indeed. We're having a late date in the gallery this evening. At 6:30, we're going to have the makers talk about their work very informally with wine. The wine's very important. And I'd invite you all to come and join us for that this evening if you're still here in Kilkenny. And apart from that, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much to all of the speakers for the work that you've put into this. And hopefully this is the beginning of conversations rather than the end of them.